我们今天邀请到的是传奇投资人莫尼什·帕伯莱先生。那帕伯莱在2007年7月与盖伊·斯皮尔一起，以65万美元的价格成功拍下了巴菲特的午餐会。但让他成名的并不是天价午餐，而是他基金的优异业绩。自1999年创办帕伯莱投资基金以来，23年中基金的收益超过了15倍。那芒格也把他当作非常亲密的朋友，并且成为了他的导师。这说明莫尼什有他的过人之处，芒格看到了他的聪明才智，并且让他融入自己的圈子。Hi Mohnish， 我想先和你聊一聊查理芒格。在2008年，巴菲特把你介绍给芒格之后，你和芒格一直是很好的朋友，你可以近距离的观察他，包括他如何投资思考，他如何学习和生活。你有什么难忘的时刻吗？可否谈一谈在过去15年来，你从芒格那里学到的最主要的这个感受是什么？
Well, it's a pleasure to be here with you, and I have to pinch myself sometimes about whether it's true that Charlie is a friend of mine. I would say that most of the things I have learned from Charlie Munger and from Warren Buffett has been from what is in the public domain, what they have written about and what they have spoken about. There's a very rich amount of information that they have tried to share and educate investors around the world, and not just how to invest, but also how to lead a great life. I think what I learned, the most I learned from Charlie Munger was not so much with what he was saying. It was more by observing him, kind of how is he interacting with his kids? He has 8 kids. How is he interacting with the spouses of those kids? How is he interacting with the grandchildren? And now he even has great-grandchildren. And how does he interact with his friends, with his business partners, with his fishing buddy, and so on. So I when I observe Charlie, and also in terms of how he spends his day and what he focuses on and so on, I think those things taught me a lot. They taught me a lot more than just, I would say that most of the lessons that we can learn from Charlie Munger or Warren Buffett, I think in books like Poor Charlie's Almanac or The Making of an American Capitalist by Roger Lowenstein, these books do a great job of explaining these men and what they're all about to us. I got the kind of the human qualities more from just observing him. And I think while he comes across sometimes at the Berkshire meeting as being very blunt and maybe with a somewhat harsh exterior, he has a beautiful heart. He is a very warm and loving person. He is a very rational person. He lives a very simple life. Warren Buffett lives in the same home he used to live in 1954. So for 67 years, he's in the same home. In the case of Charlie Munger, he's in the same home since the early 1960s, maybe 64, 65, like 58, almost 60 years in the same home. And it's a home that he designed, and all his children grew up in that home and so on. So I think the biggest lessons I've learned from Charlie have really not been what he has said to me, though he has said many amazing things to me. I think it's just observing how he interacts and goes about his life. And I think that taught me a lot.
我们听到的故事是这样的，是巴菲特会在这个圣诞节的时候给他的子女发股票，这是他们的圣诞节的礼物。你现在会看到他们还在圣诞节的时候给他们的孙子或孙女发股票吗？
Yeah, I mean, I know that Warren Buffett does that every year at Christmas time. It's not just to the children and grandchildren. He gives, so, U.S. gifting laws allow you, I think now, to give about $17,000 a year to anyone with no tax consequence. Warren actually includes, I would say, probably something like maybe 30 family members in that giving. So cousins, nephews, nieces. So it's a large group of family members, and he doesn't really try to judge, whether he likes them or not. He just, gives it to them across the board. I don't know whether Charlie does exactly the same thing, but what Charlie did do a few years ago is that, unfortunately, his wife passed away a few years back. She had always wanted that half their money, which was basically her half, to go to her children. It just so happened that there was only 1 year in the US tax code when there was no inheritance tax. There was no estate tax. And it just so happened that his wife, she had an accident, she fell down the stairs. She died the year in which there was no inheritance tax. So what Charlie did that particular year is he took half his Berkshire Hathaway shares and he divided them in 8 because he has 8 kids, and he distributed it to those kids in that year. I think at that time it would have been about $125 million per kid, which I think today would be probably about 3 or 4 times that amount. If the children kept the money, it would be maybe around 500 million or so per kid, approximately. Also, what I have observed is that many of the children have set up their own charities and foundations, and they are doing some amazing work. Even Warren Buffett's kids are doing some amazing work. So, for example, Howard Buffett, who is Warren Buffett's son, has been to Ukraine many times since the war started. He goes nearly to the front line of the battlefield, and he has given a lot of help to the Ukrainian people and especially to the Ukrainian farmers, because he's a farmer. And the same thing in the case of, I have gotten to know many of Charlie's children. They have become good friends of mine, and they're wonderful human beings. And again, they have done a number of interesting things with the charitable giving that they're doing. For the most part, I would say a lot of the money that Charlie has given to his kids is going to end up being used to improve society. They do live well. They all have they have good homes and good lifestyle and all of that. But I think that they still focus very heavily on helping humans, which is great.
巴菲特给他们孩子的股票是他经过筛选的吗？比如说50年前，他或许可能会给可口可乐，但是现在他会换成像比亚迪这样的公司吗？他的股票是随着时间不同而进行更换的吗？
Yeah, I do know that in the past he gave Coke shares. I think it's possible he's given Berkshire shares, though I would think that's unlikely because I don't think he kind of likes to buy and sell the Berkshire shares. I think every year the Gates Foundation and his three children get a large number of Berkshire shares, which he has pledged to give to all of them. I don't think it is known how that or what shares are being given. I would doubt that it would be BYD shares. I think that one of the reasons why I would doubt that is that you would need to either have the ADR or you would need to basically buy the shares in Hong Kong. So a lot of people will need to have brokerage accounts in foreign countries and so on. So my guess is that he's many years maybe either given cash or possibly some other stock, which was like Coca-Cola, for example, kind of taken it from there. Yeah.
2018年，报道组我们远赴奥马哈去参加了当年的伯克希尔股东会，并且在股东会之后采访了查理芒格先生。然后他在采访中和我们的记者强调说要保持理性，强调了理性的重要。然后他说，想要成为一个理性的人，需要一辈子的努力。他现在99岁了，他依然在为理性而努力吗？
Yeah, actually, I saw that interview that you guys did in '99. I thought that was a great interview. And I think you also had Li Lu there, which was wonderful. Charlie will be 100 years old on January 1st. I met him in Omaha, but before that, I met him at his home in April for dinner. He invited me to his birthday party. On December 31st, rolling into January 1st, they're going to have a big celebration for Charlie's 100th birthday. He had invited me for his 90th birthday. Then he invited me for his 95th birthday. These were very big parties. Warren Buffett flew in, and a lot of different celebrities flew in California. I really enjoyed the 95th birthday. And so I'm looking forward to attending his 100th birthday party. It may be a lot bigger than the previous ones because that's a very big milestone. All his family and close friends and everyone will be there. Yes, so I think being rational is really important to Charlie. I have actually not seen, obviously he has physically declined over the years because of his age. So, for example, he cannot play golf anymore. He used to play bridge at the club. He doesn't go to the club anymore. So his mobility is limited, but mentally he is very sharp. I think he gets tired more easily now. Sometimes I think he's gone to sleep. Like when we're talking, he's gone to sleep. And I'll say something, and then he just responds like he's been listening, But I don't notice any cognitive decline in him. And I think rationality is very, very central to what Charlie is all about. And one needs to be very rational in the business and investing world. One should be less rational with the relationships that we have. So relationships need more emotion. And so Charlie balances that really well. I think he has a very strong rational side. He can understand the situation, but then he can overlay the right emotions. So I see that he gets along with a wide range of people. And very few things bother him. I think he's, for example, when I go to dinner at his place, whatever they put in front of him to eat, he just eats. He never really makes a demand, I would like to have this kind of food or that kind of food. He's very kind of easygoing. The family restricts how much sees candy he eats. So usually when I go to his place for dessert, many times sees candy is served for dessert. And they tell me, look, we only bring out the sees candy like 2-3 times a month, even though maybe Charlie would like it more often. But you see in the Berkshire meeting and the Daily Journal meeting, he eats a lot of candy. And the reason is because no one can control him then. The candy is sitting there, no one's going to come and tell him you can't eat, etc. So they let him do whatever he wants at the Berkshire meeting with how amount of candy he wants to eat. Yeah, so I think rationality is a very important reason for Charlie's success. It's really important for humans to understand that and get that from him.
在你理解什么样叫理性，或者你看到查理做的哪件事是理性，我们可以通过哪些方面，然后让自己变得更理性？
Yeah, I think one of the things he says is that humans usually will become irrational when they have an opinion about something. Okay, so for example, if you ask some humans, should Harvard University give preference to African Americans to enter a little bit easier than everybody else? Okay, so people will have different opinions. Some will say, no, please treat everyone the same. Others will say, no, this population was discriminated against in the past, and we need to make some changes to even the playing field. So there are different arguments on both sides. And the way Charlie would approach something like this, he says that you are not entitled to have an opinion unless you can state the arguments for the other side as well as you can state the argument for your opinion. So he feels that you should know both sides. Okay, so for example, Russia has invaded Ukraine. Right now, a lot of people will say that's terrible and it shouldn't have happened or whatever else, But Charlie would say, well, also we should look at it from the Russian side. We should understand what is going through their minds and why did they do it, as well as from the Ukrainian side. So basically, it is really difficult for humans to have both sides of the argument in their brain at the same time and be able to process it in a rational manner. What most humans will do is they will have an ideology, like they will believe Harvard should only take people based on merit and no other factors should come in. And they will not even consider the other side. And I think this is one of Charlie's great strengths. And the place where it comes into play a lot is, for example, when we look at making an investment into a company, there are lots and lots of factors that will affect the future outcome of that investment. Many factors that we may understand or not understand. Charlie feels, for example, and in fact, both Warren and Charlie, one of the tools they use to help them in the investing is, let's say they're looking at a particular company, let's say, which makes certain auto parts, for example, and they like the company, whatever. What they will try to do is they will try to go talk to competitors of the company, and they will ask the competitor, which companies in your industry do you admire a lot? And which companies do you think are really bad? And he says that, like Buffett says, if you talk to 5 or 6 competitors about a particular company, what will happen is you will get a very clear idea after that which company is the best company in that industry and which company is the worst company. And these things may not be apparent in the numbers, or they may actually explain why certain companies do a lot better than others over time. One of the dangers in investing is we can fall in love with a company or an investment. And when we fall in love with a company or an investment, rationality goes away. We are no longer thinking in a very rational, pragmatic way. We always have to kind of pull that back. And one of the techniques both Warren and Charlie use to try to understand how the future will unfold is by really studying the past carefully. So, for example, if you look at investment in BYD, which Li Lu was the first person who made the investment. And in fact, when he first invested in BYD, it was almost like a venture capital investment. It was very, very small. It was a very small company. But he already was able to see that the trajectory, and Chuanfu Wang was a very unusual, very bright, and very hardworking person. When he later brought the company to Charlie's attention, Charlie went back and studied the very early history of Chuanfu Wang when there was no company and he was trying to start something and he had no money. He had many siblings, I think like 7 or 8 siblings. This is a large family. One of his brothers, and Chuanfu Wang was one of the youngest people in the family, but the brother saw unusual traits in his brother, and he helped give Chuanfu Wang the money to get started. And then, of course, Chuanfu Wang, once he got a little bit of money, he could get going. He was a genius at chemistry, and he works very long hours. He could build that business. But really, it was from Charlie's perspective, a Confucian ideal, kind of a Confucian principle to help the one who is most capable. And so he studied, in the case of BYD, he studied the very, very early history of the company very carefully. And then he also studied the trajectory. So, for example, in the case of BYD, they were trying to manufacture these batteries, which required clean rooms in Japan. These batteries are made in Japan, and they were very large clean rooms, which are very expensive. And one of the first innovations that BYD made was that instead of making the room clean, they made a small box clean, and the women would put their hand in gloves through the box and work on those things. So basically, he was able to drop the cost a lot of manufacturing by rethinking how it was done. And repeatedly, they kind of excelled really in terms of the innovation and the tenacity. The other thing is that Chuanfu Wang lives with his workers. So, they have the large residential blocks of apartments. He lives in one of those blocks with the workers. And so that type of a culture means that your people will do anything for you, because and so I think he very carefully studied individual pieces about Chuanfu Wang. He was aware of people like Thomas Edison. He was aware of people like Henry Ford. He was aware of people like Bill Gates. And he could make a connection with the way Chuanfu Wang was, with the way some of these people were. And in the end, that led to the investment and it did really well. So I think that's kind of he did not just accept that the BYD investment should be made because Li Lu thinks it's great. That's not the reason why he made the investment. He did his own analysis.
我想做到理性是需要对自己诚实，这是一个工具吗？
Yeah, so there is this concept of being in alignment. Being in alignment means that you are a very honest and candid person. So if you feel something about a certain topic or some person, you're very open and honest about it. And so the alignment I would say alignment is almost a subset of being rational. In general, for most humans, it is not easy to always be open and candid and honest about the other people we interact with. Because sometimes we interact with people who may not be that good. And if you tell them that to their face, that's going to cause conflict and issues, So one of the important aspects of the alignment and being true to yourself is both Charlie and Warren try really hard to associate with very high quality people. It is, it seems obvious that we should interact and have friends who are very high quality. But actually, if you just look at your friends today, what you may find is they are pleasant people, nice people, but not that high quality, right? They're kind of okay to be around, but they're not high quality. So one needs to be a harsh grader. What that means is if you really want to have this being true to yourself and be aligned and have a great life and all of that, you would need to get rid of those people from your life. And getting rid of those people in your life is not an easy thing to do for most humans. The easy thing is just keep going along. So I have tried to do this for a long time where, if I meet someone for the first time for lunch or tea or something, after I meet them, I try to do some analysis of, how did I feel? What do I think? And I try to set a high bar where I say that unless it is something truly exceptional, I don't really want to, increase the interaction. My father used to say that to lead a good life, you need to have one good wife and one good friend. So we don't need large numbers of people. Less is more. So I think both Charlie and Warren, part of their rationality and part of what they've done is they are really good at figuring out. For example, when I met Charlie's friends, I was really surprised in terms of the quality. These individuals were some of the highest quality people I have ever met. They were just truly, I think Charlie spent a lifetime, sifting through. And so I made them my friends because I already know they're so high quality people and they're such wonderful people. But that is not an easy thing to do where we already have relationships. And so what you can start doing is spend more time with the people who are truly exceptional, truly high quality. I met some friends of Charlie Munger who are poor people. They're not rich. Like one time I met a friend of his who goes fishing with him in Minnesota every summer. Charlie has a summer home in Minnesota. He goes there for a month for fishing, month or month and a half. This person is just an ordinary person in Minnesota who's just Charlie's fishing buddy. But I found he's a very high quality person. I met him in Omaha at a dinner that Charlie Munger has before the meeting. About 200 people come for that dinner. So he came up to me. I mean, I was just, I saw somebody I didn't know. I said hello. I said hello to him. I said, how do you know Charlie? And he immediately says to me that I am not a person who understands business. And I am not a person who understands investing. And I am not a rich person. He started out by telling me all the things that he is not. What you could tell right away is he was a very humble person, right? I mean, he wasn't trying to say, oh, I'm a great guy because I'm friends with Charlie. So I asked him, I said, how do you know Charlie? He said, Charlie and I have been fishing buddies for a long time in Minnesota. When he comes to Minnesota, we go fishing many times and so on. And I could see that basically just in meeting him just for a brief amount of time, that he was a simple, down-to-earth, honest, aligned person. Didn't really have any agenda or anything else, and was just a nice person with some great qualities of like honesty and integrity and humility. And so I think those were things that appealed to Charlie. And you could see that in 10 minutes of meeting.
你说过，我们不能用一个画笔去描绘一个国家，因为它是一个彩虹，它是多样的。所以，对于中国，你现在的观点是什么？大多数的这种全球资本，他们都没有看到中国的机会吗？
First of all, I think China has really been through a miraculous journey in the last several decades. I think that one of the best leaders ever, any country in the world, was Deng Xiaoping. And I think he did a truly exceptional job. And I think it was amazing that he was able to take a communist country, everything was state-owned, into a very capitalist direction and lifted hundreds of millions of people from poverty. So the Chinese people are natural entrepreneurs. And they were trapped in a system which was the opposite of an entrepreneurial system. So once we unleashed, and made them free to be the natural entrepreneurs that they were, I think it worked spectacularly. So I think it's the only time in the world where we've had, the largest country in the world lift such a large portion of the population from very extreme poverty to significant affluence in a very short period of time. So it's really miraculous. I think when I look at China, it's almost like it couldn't really happen anyplace else. Charlie also believes that the Chinese people genetically are superior to other races. And this is a kind of a politically incorrect thing to say, but he says it anyway because he thinks it's true. And I think he says that the IQ of the average person in China is higher than in other parts of the world, mainly because of the cultivation of rice. Basically, if you go back in history, it was an agrarian society and it was very heavily a rice growing society. Most people were engaged in agriculture growing rice. Growing rice is very different from growing corn or soybean. If I want to grow corn, I just throw the corn seed on the ground and I come back after a few months and the corn plant will be ready for me to harvest. Rice cultivation is very complicated. You have to actually start and replant and make sure the water level. There's actually quite a bit of math involved in being a good rice farmer. So I think what Charlie was saying is that at the starting point in China, the IQ level was the same as the rest of the world. But what happened is that the lower IQ end of the population basically could not grow rice because they could not do the math. And they ended up going extinct. And so you end up with a population on average, which is good at math. Now, one of the negatives that Charlie sees with excess math skills that most Chinese have is they have a higher propensity to gamble. Macau is very popular and Vegas is very popular, and Charlie sees that as a negative. So one of the outlets the math ability finds is in gambling, which is a negative. And if it can be used in a positive way, which it has been used a lot in a positive way by many Chinese. So the way I look at China is that you have a very hardworking population. People are willing to work very hard. It's a smart population. Now, unfortunately, we have negative population growth in China because people are not having enough kids. So that is a negative. It's not as bad as Korea. Korea, I think, is in really bad shape in terms of the amount the population is going down, and Japan is going down significantly. So if China can figure out some way to arrest the decline in population, that would be a positive. Otherwise, it's going to start becoming an aging society like we've seen in Japan. So I think when I look at China, I see a country where if you come up with an interesting product or an interesting service, which can have broad appeal, it can have tremendous tailwinds. We have seen this repeatedly in companies, Tencent and ride-hailing companies, Meituan and Pinduoduo and so on. Many companies which have come up with something which is a great innovation has been able to scale really fast. So the big advantage China offers is that if someone were to come up with something which is amazing in Jamaica, for example, the country is too small to really have a lot of impact. I think that having the 1.4 billion population, if you can leverage something digital, it can do really well. I think for me personally, I would say China would be a difficult place for me to invest because there's many things about nuances and culture that I would not understand. So usually, I think if I am looking to invest in China, I will talk to my friend Li Lu and ask him, what makes sense or doesn't make sense. A few years back, Li Lu had suggested I buy Moutai, which I did, and it went up a lot. It did really well, even though I don't drink any alcohol. And then a few years after that, I visited Moutai's factory in China with my daughter and my friend Guy Spear. That was amazing. I think it's an incredible company. So I think that in China, we have many, many great businesses and many great opportunities. It may be easier for people in China to be able to sift through all that than someone like me. But if I can get someone like Li Lu to help me, then it can work out pretty well.
你提到了茅台，这个我们非常感兴趣。你现在仓位里还有茅台吗？
A few years ago, I had a conversation with Charlie Munger many, many years ago when we were having dinner. So he says to me, Mohnish, you own Moutai? I said, yes. He said, you know that when you die, you will still own Moutai? I said, yes. So what was happening is God was telling me, never sell Moutai. Okay, that's what, God is also known as Charlie Munger. So God is telling me directly, never sell Moutai. So I said yes, and I had no plans to ever sell it. Then a few years after that, Li Lu called me and said, I am selling my Moutai, and I think you should sell your Moutai stake. So I said, but Li Lu, God told me never to sell it. So he said, so he was seeing some issues coming up in the distribution of Moutai. Maybe there was some corruption in the distribution, which was bothering him, some things on that front. He said, I think you should sell and move on. So I thought about it. I said, I don't know anything about Moutai. I don't even drink alcohol. And Li Lu knows everything. So I said, I already made like 5-6 times my money. I think I should listen to him. So At that point, I sold the Moutai shares that I had no plans to ever sell. And then a couple of years later, it was more than double the price I sold at. It just kept going. My daughter also had invested in Moutai. And when I told her what Lilu told me, she disregarded. So she kept her shares because she likes the company and she liked to visit. And I was too stupid and I sold it. And I have not looked at Moutai recently. And based on what you are saying, I'm going to take another look at it. But, at the time when we were originally buying it, the price was 1/10 of the current price. It's really was a very different situation then. Now it is, even now with a little bit of decline, it is the most valuable liquor company in the world. It still is the most valuable. So I think the moat of Moutai is an indestructible. It just cannot be touched by any company. And I noticed when I went to the factory, the cost for them to make one bottle of Moutai, and they have no automation of manufacturing. It's just done with the same way it was made 50 years or 100 years ago. There's no advances done in the way they make it. I think the cost to make a bottle is less than $5, including the packaging and everything. And the selling price is much more than 1,000. I mean, there's almost no businesses in the world that would have those kind of economics. I do remind Li Nu every time I meet him that he's not always giving me the correct information. So I tell him next time, please don't tell me to sell when God has told me to never sell. But this is the way life is, so we have to, do what happens and go along with it.
我想再和您聊一聊关于腾讯，因为您好像更喜欢腾讯。现在对于腾讯怎么看？它现在14倍，估值是不是比较低呢？
I think Pony Ma is, I would say, one of the greatest entrepreneurs ever to come about. He's a truly exceptional person in the last 100 years in business. I think he's a very much an off the charts person in terms of what he has built and how he has executed. And yeah, so originally I had invested in Alibaba, but when I subsequently studied Tencent, I found that my opinion was that Tencent was a superior company to Alibaba on a few different fronts. I switched the investment now. Both these investments, both Alibaba and Tencent, have not worked so far for me, partially because of, probably mainly because there were a lot of changes that came about from government regulations and government directives. Some of that is hard to predict. A lot of that is hard to predict. But I would say this. I would say that Tencent is kind of a very flexible company which can look at circumstances that are there in a number of different ways and can adjust its operations accordingly. So, for example, when they were facing a number of restrictions in China, they just increased their activity outside China. And they've done an extremely good job, both in terms of internal R&D and internal products that they have developed and how they have scaled those, as well as the investments that they have made and how they have created great partnerships. So I would say that in China, if I were to do anything, Tencent would be at the top of my list, just in terms of the nature of that business and the nature of the entrepreneur and the team. But I also have found, because we can invest around the globe, we found a lot of interesting opportunities in Turkey, for example, which we did, which has worked well, and also more recently in the United States. Basically, because I am not limited to one particular geography, one of the negatives that comes up with both Moutai and Tencent is size. So while both have very reasonable valuations and they are not overvalued, the market caps of both companies make them amongst the largest businesses in the world. And so what that means is that there are very few businesses that will get to a market cap of 2 trillion or 3 trillion or 4 trillion. 4 trillion doesn't even exist today. Apple is hovering around 3 trillion. But even a trillion is a lot. You know, we used to have no businesses more than 500-600 billion. I do have a concern about the law of large numbers. One of the advantages an individual investor has is that if you have a small pool of capital, you may be able to identify a company that can become 10, 20, 50 times larger than what it is. But it is difficult for a company like Tencent or Moutai to become 10 times larger in the next few years. I think that would be almost impossible. There is a counterbalance that comes up when you're looking at these very large mega caps, is how much further can they go? Because they're just carrying, it's like a big aircraft carrier. It's difficult to move and navigate even though you have a lot of might. And so those are things to keep in mind. Is sometimes a smaller business, which may not have the scale and size and moat of a Moutai or a Tencent, can be a better investment.
像我们刚才提到的这样的，比如说政府和监管的种种因素，所以现在国际资本在选择给中国做投资的时候，他们会思考打多少折合算。在您看来，这个折扣要打到多少是一个比较合适的一个买入的一个机会？
Yeah, I mean, I think that it was not a factor a few years ago, and it is a significant factor today. It definitely has an impact and probably a negative impact that did not exist a few years ago.
我们看到大多数人的视角都很短期，不过像伯克希尔哈撒韦或者是像您这样的投资人，好像在以一种偏向于永恒的方式思考问题。这之间，有什么在你看来有什么区别吗？可以展开和我们描述一下吗？
There's a book that came out a few years ago. It's called Give and Take. It's written by a guy named Adam Grant, Give and Take. And what Adam Grant says is there are three kinds of people in the world. They are the givers, you know, people who always give a lot of things. There are the takers, which means they will take something from you but not return it. And they are the matchers, which means if I do you a favor, then you do me a similar favor. You have givers, you have takers, you have matchers. We should never have any takers in our life. So if you see someone as a taker, wipe them out right away. We should also never have any matchers in our life. People who are doing mathematical calculation. Oh, he bought me lunch last week. I'm going to buy him lunch next week. We don't want the matchers. We only want the givers, which means people who give selflessly without looking to get anything back. And what the other thing we have to do if we want to play infinite games is we have to be givers. So we cannot think about doing some action with the idea that how will it benefit me? So sometimes if I'm talking to somebody, they have some problem. If I'm a giver, I just help the person. I don't think about how is it going to help me to spend the time or whatever. To play infinite games, we need to be givers. Berkshire Hathaway is a good example of companies a giver. They have taught everybody a lot of things which they have no benefit from teaching, but they did that. And the second thing is, so we need to be givers and we need to surround ourselves with givers. We need to take out all the matchers and the takers and only have a universe of givers. And that's what I noticed when I met Charlie's friends. They're all givers, 100%. Charlie is a giver. Warren is a giver. I think that's playing infinite games is really powerful. And I think this is the way you can play those games.
比如说像法拉利这样的公司，你是否会拿着它度过这样的波动期，尽可能的长期的持有它，还是你会在收益最大的时候去减仓，这样让你的这个收益落袋为安？你是如何思考这样比较困难而且矛盾的这个问题的？
One of the biggest mistakes I have made many, many times in my investing career is I have repeatedly sold very good businesses because they appeared to be overvalued. And what I have learned after taking a lot of arrows in my back and making a lot of mistakes is when you find yourself in the happy position of owning a fraction of a great business, pretty much never sell it. Unless it is just extreme, egregious, crazy price. So if we look at a business like Ferrari today, I think the price of the stock is more than 300. In 2012, when I originally invested in a company that owned Ferrari, the effective price was less than $15. So in the last 11 years, the price of Ferrari has gone up more than 20 times. One of my biggest regrets is the sale of Ferrari and the sale of Moutai, for example, because these are iconic, one of a kind, very unusual companies. I made a lot of money on Ferrari. I also made a lot of money on Moutai. But the best thing one can do is when one finds oneself in the happy position of owning a truly terrific business is to never sell it.
你能和我们讲一讲你是如何实际的安排你的这一天的吗？就比如说你的工作、你的生活是如何安排他们的？这可能对我们这些其他人会有一些帮助。
I learned this from Warren Buffett, which is to not put anything on the schedule, keep the schedule open, which is why it took so long for us to talk because there's nothing on the schedule. So I try hard. So for example, today, this talk is the only thing on my schedule. There's nothing else on my schedule. Usually before the day starts, I don't really have a good idea of how I'm going to spend it, but I like to have time to think. I like to have time to read, and I like to have time to explore anything that I am exploring. So last few months, I was studying 2 companies. Because there's not much on my schedule, I could do all kinds of things to understand those companies. I talked to a lot of different people about it, and I read a lot of different things and so on to eventually get a picture in my head of what it looks like. I think one of the biggest luxuries I learned from Warren and Charlie is to have the independence and to have the freedom of time and not to be very minutely scheduled. So I try to keep it very free and flexible so I can be open and I can think about what may be the way I want to spend the time.
我也只有今天和您做采访这一件事情，整个一天我都在为这件事情做准备。中国是一个新兴市场，波动很大，机会也很多。给我们中国的投资者再留最后一句话吧。
Yeah, I mean, I would say the one suggestion I would have for your listeners is that your readers, like I said, your listeners in the past, like I said, is high IQ and high math skills. And generally what that leads to is a lot of gambling in the stock market, which is a negative. So a lot of Chinese investors are buying and selling too much. And my suggestion to them would be that study the businesses, find the great businesses, buy them at reasonable prices, and then never, ever sell them.
听到你的思考，我非常高兴。我相信我们的读者听到你的思考也会非常的有启发。你在中国其实有很多的读者在关注你，包括我们的读者之前会关注您的一些精彩的语录，所以您在中国其实是有一些非常好的读者和投资人的基础的。我相信我们这期节目发布之后会带来很多人的这种关注，以及会给他们带来很多的启发。再次谢谢你们，Mohnish。
Well, I enjoyed the session. Thank you very much. I think the reason is because Charlie Munger is really popular in China. He's extremely popular. And sometime when they read about Charlie Munger, they maybe read about me. And then they got a little bit interested in me. So I think it's really Charlie Munger popularity that drives some of that. But yeah, no, it's wonderful to have that. And it's wonderful to have the Chinese readers and followers. It's wonderful. Thank you.